If you had asked me a year ago how I describe my marriage, I would have said it was stable. Not perfect, but comfortable. We had been together for almost 8 years and married for 5. Life had settled into a routine: work during the day, dinner together most nights, watching shows on the couch before going to bed. It wasn't exciting every day, but it felt safe and normal, and I thought we were both happy with that. So when my husband brought up the idea that would eventually change everything, it didn't register as a serious problem at first. It was just a random evening. We had finished dinner and were sitting at the kitchen table scrolling on our phones. Out of nowhere, he looked up and asked, "Have you ever thought about open marriages?" I laughed at first because I assumed he had read something online and wanted to talk about it like he usually did with random topics. But he didn't laugh back. Instead, he started explaining it seriously, talking about how some couples allow each other to see other people and how it can actually make relationships stronger. The longer he talked, the more I realized this wasn't just an abstract conversation. He had clearly been thinking about this for a while. He said it was about honesty and freedom, about not feeling restricted by traditional expectations. And sitting there across from him, I remember feeling this strange mix of confusion and disbelief, because until that moment I thought our marriage was exactly what we both wanted. But the way he was talking made it clear that he had been questioning that for a lot longer than I realized. That I didn't answer him right away. I just sat there staring at him, trying to figure out if this was some kind of test or if he had already made up his mind about something. Because when someone suddenly brings up open marriage out of nowhere, the first thought that hits you isn't curiosity. It's suspicion. That I asked him the question that was already forming in my head. Is there someone else? He immediately shook his head and said no, that it wasn't about a specific person. According to him, it was just an idea about how relationships could work differently. He kept talking about honesty and freedom, about how people shouldn't feel trapped in long-term relationships. The strange thing was how calm he sounded while explaining it, like he had rehearsed the argument before bringing it up to me. Meanwhile, I could feel my stomach tightening the longer the conversation went on, because even if he insisted there wasn't anyone else involved, the fact that he wanted this at all meant something had already shifted in his mind. And that realization made me wonder whether I had been the only one who thought our marriage was exactly the way it was supposed to be. I didn't react the way he probably expected. I didn't yell or accuse him of anything. I just asked questions because my brain was trying to understand where this was coming from. The more he explained it, the more it sounded like he had already convinced himself it was a good idea. He talked about how some couples are happier when they don't feel restricted, how honesty is better than secrets, how it could even make us appreciate each other more. I remember listening to him and realizing something uncomfortable. This wasn't a random thought. That he had clearly been thinking about this for a long time before saying it out loud. At one point, I asked him directly, "So what exactly are you saying? That you want to start seeing other people?" He hesitated for a second, then said something that stuck with me. He said he thought it could be something we both explored, not just him. That it would be fair, equal rules for both of us. But the strange thing was the way he said it, like he expected the idea to sound exciting instead of devastating. Sitting there across from him, I started feeling something I hadn't felt in our marriage before. The quiet realization that the person in front of me might be imagining a completely different version of our relationship than the one I thought we had. I didn't give him an answer that night. I told him I needed time to think, which was true, but the truth was I already felt something inside me breaking. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly shifting. For the next few days, the idea kept replaying in my head. I kept wondering if he had already met someone, or if he was just bored with our life and looking for something new. Every normal moment suddenly felt different. Sitting on the couch together, eating dinner, even simple conversations felt strange because now I knew he was imagining a version of our marriage where other people were involved. A few nights later, he brought it up again. This time he sounded even more confident, like he had convinced himself that it would actually help us. And that's when I did something he clearly didn't expect. I told him yes. I told him that if he truly believed an open marriage was the right thing for us, then we could try it. The look on his face wasn't excitement the way I thought it would be. It was surprise. And in that moment, I had the strange feeling that he hadn't actually expected me to agree. After that conversation, things changed quickly. At first, everything still felt almost theoretical, like we had just talked about an idea, but nothing had really happened yet. But within a week, I started noticing how serious he actually was. He spent more time on his phone, joined dating apps, and casually mentioned conversations he was having with women online. He tried to act relaxed about it, like it was all part of this modern arrangement he had suggested. The strange part was how confident he seemed. It was almost like he expected everything to work perfectly for him. Meanwhile, I was still trying to process what our marriage had suddenly become. One evening, he told me he had a date planned. He said it in a calm voice, like he was telling me about a work meeting. I nodded and said okay, even though the word felt heavy coming out of my mouth. And when he left that night, I remember sitting alone in the house realizing that the life I thought we had built together had just quietly turned into something completely different. For a while, it felt like everything was happening exactly the way he expected. He went on a few dates, came home acting relaxed, and talked about it like it was all very normal. He kept saying this was proof that our relationship was strong enough to handle something like this, that I didn't argue with him. I mostly just listened, but eventually something else started happening that he clearly hadn't thought about as much. I also started going out. At first it was just curiosity, nothing serious. I downloaded one of the same apps he was using and started talking to a few people. What surprised me was how easy it was to get attention. Messages came quickly, conversations started naturally, and before long, I had someone asking me out to dinner. When I told my husband I had a date planned too, he tried to act casual about it, but I could see the shift in his face immediately. It was subtle, just a second of hesitation before he said, "Oh, okay." And in that moment, I had the strange feeling that this situation wasn't unfolding the way he originally imagined it would. At first, he tried to pretend everything was still perfectly fine. When I told him about my date, he nodded and said that was the whole point of the arrangement, that we were both free to explore things. But the energy between us started changing almost immediately. The night I went out, he asked a lot more questions than I expected. Where we were going, what time I'd be home, what kind of person he was. None of it sounded aggressive, but the curiosity felt different from before. When I got home later that evening, he was still awake sitting on the couch. He asked how it went, and when I said it was actually a nice dinner, I could see something tighten in his expression for a moment before he forced a smile. That was the first time I realized something important. When he imagined this open marriage, he had only pictured one side of it. And now that the other side was becoming real, it clearly didn't feel the same to him anymore. Over the next few weeks, the tension kept growing. I went on a couple more dates, nothing serious, just meeting people and seeing what it felt like. But every time I mentioned going out, his reaction got harder to hide. At first, he asked casual questions. Then the questions started sounding more like interrogation. Who was the guy? How old was he? Where did we go? How late was I out? The strange thing was that he was still seeing other people too, but somehow that didn't seem to bother him at all. One night after I came home from dinner, he finally said something honest. He admitted that hearing about my dates made him uncomfortable. I remember looking at him and reminding him that this was his idea in the first place. He didn't deny that. Instead, he said he hadn't expected it to feel this different when it was actually happening. And in that moment, it became very clear that the situation he thought he was creating wasn't unfolding the way he had imagined it all. A few days later, the conversation finally exploded into the open. He came home one evening looking tense and asked if we could talk. I already knew what it was about before he even said anything. He started explaining that the whole situation had gone further than he expected, that hearing about my dates was bothering him more than he thought it would. Then he said something that made the entire situation suddenly clear. He suggested maybe we should close the marriage again. Just like that. I remember staring at him for a second because the irony was almost unbelievable. This was the same man who had spent weeks convincing me how healthy and modern open relationships were supposed to be. But now that the rules were actually applying to both of us, the idea suddenly didn't seem so appealing anymore. When I asked him why he wanted to change things back so quickly, he hesitated before answering. And that hesitation said more than anything else he could have explained. And I remember sitting there looking at him and realizing something I hadn't fully admitted to myself until that moment. This entire situation had never been about freedom or honesty or modern relationships. It had been about what he wanted. When he first suggested opening the marriage, he spoke about it like it was some balanced arrangement where both of us could explore connections and somehow come back to each other stronger. But the reality was very different. When he went on dates, when he talked to other women, when he stayed out late, it was something he expected me to accept calmly. In his mind, that was the natural outcome of the decision he had pushed for. But when the same freedom applied to me, when I started meeting people and going out and enjoying myself instead of sitting at home waiting, Suddenly, everything felt wrong to him. I could see it clearly now in the way he spoke, the way he tried to frame the conversation like we had both made a mistake together. He kept saying things like, maybe this wasn't the best idea for us, or maybe we moved too fast. But the truth was obvious. The idea had only felt good to him when he imagined it working in his favor. I reminded him of the conversations we had at the beginning, how confident he had sounded explaining that love and commitment didn't have to mean exclusivity, how he told me this would make our relationship stronger because we trusted each other. Now those same arguments had disappeared completely. What replaced them was insecurity, jealousy, and the quiet realization that the rules he created were never meant to apply equally. Sitting there in that moment, I understood something that had taken weeks to become clear. He hadn't asked for an open marriage because he believed in it. He asked for it because he thought he would be the one benefiting from it. And the second reality proved otherwise. The entire concept suddenly became a problem he wanted to erase, and that realization changed the way I saw everything. I sat there for a long moment looking at him, remembering how confident he had sounded the night he first brought up the idea. Back then, he spoke like someone explaining a philosophy he truly believed in. Now he looked like someone trying to quietly undo a decision that had gotten out of his control. I asked him something simple. If things had been the other way around, if I had struggled to meet anyone and he was the one going on dates every week, would he still want to close the marriage? He didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything I needed to know. Because the truth was obvious now. He had imagined a situation where he could explore other relationships while I stayed emotionally anchored to him, still the stable center of our life together. What he hadn't imagined was me discovering that the world outside our marriage was still open to me too. I told him that night that the real damage wasn't the dates or the jealousy that came afterward. The damage happened the moment he decided our marriage wasn't enough for him the way it was. Once that door had been opened, there was no pretending we were the same couple we used to be. He kept talking about fixing things, about going back to normal, but some things don't reset like that. Trust changes shape once you see someone differently. And sitting there across from him, I realized the hardest truth of all. Sometimes people ask for freedom without understanding that once it exists, it belongs to both of you.